The Kirk Mill site is a very important water power site. It was a corn milling site, and we chased back documents as far as we can. We got as far as 1544, which is the time of Henry VIII, good gracious. And then in 1785 there was a complete change. It was turned into a factory, what they call an Arkwright style cotton spinning mill. This is probably the most significant part because it represents the start of the Industrial Revolution here in Chipping, tucked away in this corner of Chipping. The closure came in 1866 with the cotton famine. Very shortly after that, it was used for chair making, and it's been used for chair making until 2010.
But Berries had actually started up the road in Tweedy's Mill, I think, the actual chair working business, and that was my great-great-grandfather. And sometime a few years later, they moved into the old mill here and started. I just think half a dozen chair makers, because chair making was a business, or was a skill around here, handicraft or whatever, around here. And apparently my great-grandfather just got a few people together in a bit more of an industrialised way, and that was the start.
Arkwrights move on, the corn mill has gone. There's rumblings down Moulton ground. There's things to be heard, as a rafts to be heard. H.J. knows he's to make it somehow. It's apples and pears, old berry chairs, pheasants, damsons and blowns. The water wheel turns, the farmer's wife turns, and young H.J. Merry, he's doing his sewns.
It'd be my great-grandfather used to run the company as an aside to a farm. He had a farm locally, and at certain times of the year the workers would be taken out of the works to work on the farm.
Well, they used to make there for horses. See, they had eight horses when I started. Now, all them logs then had come with horses.
They had two horses. One was a hauling horse, and the other was a snigging horse. The snigger was the horse that pulled the logs out of the wood, and the hauling horse, big cart horse, I suppose, would then pull the logs back to the factory.
They've made enough cash for 2 oak and 1 ash. He sharpened his axe and his saws, hoping to cane and with cart horse and chain. Off to the woodland in Lowland he goes.
That's right up in the old mill. Old mill. It's a long while since that were been. They were still making them then. Spindleback chairs of them. What they call spindleback, for rush bottoming.
He pays Mr. Weld and the great trees are felled. The trunks are gripped by the shade. The brush is removed, there's no time to lose. With powerful cart horses taking the strain.
My father, when he was still at school, he used to, from being about 10 or so, I used to go in the morning and switch the glue kettles on, 6 o'clock in the morning, so that the glue was heated when they came to work at 7. Because it's animal glue and it needed melting down, and then it could be there to be used when they came in. Then my father started there when he was 12, till the war. He was away 6 years in the war, and when he came back after the war, he started again, and he eventually worked his way out and became the works manager. This picture I'm looking at is situated in the old mill, and there's 2 chaps here. One is knocking the chair up with the big hammer, the other is cramping it up. But the one that's, as it stood up levelling off, that's my father. And this must be, I presume, before the last war. It looks about that time.
In the Second War, and quite a number of the staff were called up, and they seemed to send their pictures back, and I gather they were all pasted up on a board, and that's no doubt they all kept in touch because it was like a big family concern.
Herbert Ecton lived at Longridge. Actually Squires, Bob Parkinson, Ernie Kenyon, Roland Seed, that were his wife's still living yet, you know, down at Kirk Cottages. Albert Walker, yeah, Jimmy Garstang, well he worked at Berry's, but he lived at Longridge. He was a rush bottomer, yeah. They all worked there at Berry's. Frank Marsden, you know, I met Frank when he was at the army. We made a landing in what they call Ramrey Island on Japan, where Japanese were on. And it's funny, he were a transport driver, and we made landings, and we were ashore one day, and flipping out, I met him there. Aye. It was surprising, eh? When I come back out at Navy, I went back to Dairy for 6 months, and they were paying, I don't know, I think I get £2, £2 1 shilling, I think it were, you know, for wage. And Berry's, somebody were telling me, says Berry's, they should get a £3 a year. So I come up to see how John Berry, and I got on. Now I started on one of them when I started, a band mill, on and one, aye.
The old Arkwright mill was the mill until just after the war, the new place was built across the stream in the fields across. And I can remember when I was a lad, some Germans coming to our house for the tea, and they were fitting the kilns in there that dried the wood. And my dad had invited them back for tea, which was a little controversial at the time because you're talking just after the war, really. But, you know, as my father said, he'd been in the army, and the Germans weren't the Nazis, they were different people. It was different, it wasn't the same thing.
Now then, wait a minute, I think it was first photograph to take after building we made. You know, it were like, they'd been working you know, a year or two, and then they decided to, you know, photograph all staff.
My father, who passed away 3 or 4 years ago, would have known all these, and he did mention at times, and I wish now I would have taken more notice, but my grandfather is more or less in the middle here, 2 rows back with a cap on with a little sash. He still worked there, say, till he was in his 80s, packing chairs.
I believe the biggest boom was just after the Second World War, when obviously lots of people came back from the war, lots of men came back, and there was a requirement for utility, what's called utility furniture. And there was a few designs that the government supplied to factories, furniture factories all over the country, and gave them the contract to make thousands and thousands of these utility, in this case, chairs and tables.
And it was all set up then, and the factory got going, and really then, in the 50s and early 60s, they were really, really busy. I mean, making like 1,200 chairs a day.
I can remember, not long after I started, it was a regular, and a quite regular day would be over 1,000 items. And the most I think we ever did were 1,500 in a day we polished, which is a lot. That's a lot of chairs, that.
With about 250 people, really, they were flying out, you know.
The British demand a quality brand from wheelwrights and joiners time served. For so many years their blood, sweat and tears brought home the success they so richly deserved.
I left school at 15. I started at the end of March 1964. I'm leaving school, and I was put in the polish room because you had no choice where you went. Wherever they had the vacancy, that's where you went. And I worked there for, well, altogether for 17 years until leaving in late November of 1981. I worked as a polisher all the time. The first 10 years or so, I worked in what they call the new mill, which is where they really, that's where the bulk of the work was done.
Apples and pears, tables and chairs, a Russian cake from Johnny Mull's.
Chipping itself then was smaller than it is now, really. I suppose, you know, everybody knew everybody. Most people from Chipping worked at Berry's or the foundry, which was just up the road. And a lot of people from Longridge worked there. We used to travel there. Yeah, and all the same names, you know, a lot of them had worked for there for generations, one after another. You know, like the Freemans would have been there, the Cooksons.
Well, I started there in the 1963. I started there. I went from a local office job in a local village in Longridge, but the money was a lot better there. I started in the old mill, working with a lot of the ones who were then in their 60s quite and had been there a long, long time. And they taught very, very, very old Chipping dialect, really. I mean, for instance, I went out one dinner time and it was ready now, and I came back, and Dennis said, "I still getting Witchet." I said, "You what, Dennis?" "I still getting Witchet." So I'm sorry, wet feet, had your feet wet. You know, and these are all, you know, they were very, very, very strong dialect. But because they'd never moved out of Chipping, really, they'd always lived in Chipping all their lives. I mean, don't forget, we're not going back that far, but in those, I mean, back in, even then in the 60s, a lot of those people had never been much further than Preston.
Hey, my mates there, Steve Dewhurst, there up front, Bill Fair, Harry Seed, and he were a Longridge lad. That's me at back.
Actually, this was probably before my time, only just before my time at Berry, so this will be pre-1964. This is the Sawyers at the old mill who used to work in the bottom level, in the dungeons, where they used to sew all the wood up into the basic shape of the chair parts. And there's names on here: Bill Wells, Steve Dewhurst, John Burkett, Dougie Parkinson, Harry Seed, Joe Dent, Bob Parker.
That's me a bit later on there. Hey, flipping heck eye. Steve Dewhurst worked with me when I was working at saw. But he was lifting planks as they sawed. Him and John Brother. Them were two what worked with me. They worked with 4 or 5 years. They did, lifting off. It were all brute force. Then he went modern, did old John Barry. Oh no, by your eye.
Apples and pears, tables and chairs, a Russian cake from Johnny Mull's. The skies may be tall, but the order book's full, and Berry has work for his chairmaker's souls.
When I first started there, I started doing the machining for the old traditional chairs, the old ladderbacks and spindlebacks, doing the mortising and tenon and sanding and making the seats, the side seats with the rush goes round and all that. Well, another lad, Peter, was assembling them, Peter Sharples, and then eventually Peter moved away. I ended up assembling them, and then it became so few of the traditional chairs that I was doing the machining and assembling them.
It's what they call a number 9 ladderback, which it was one of the original chairs, as you might realise.
They were assembled up in the old mill, and then they would bring them down, and we would then stain them the colour, whatever colour they wanted, dark oak, medium oak, and then they would go back up to the rush bottomers, and the rush bottom then would be, which probably took, I think it took them about 4 hours to do a chair. And that's the old workhouse. And you can see there were the trees stacked across the brook, and there's one just being delivered, a load of them. Would like to have taken probably more film of it, but I think I probably took this because it was outside, it was a good day and plenty of light, They wouldn't have been able to get any good shots inside in those days, not with a cine film.
It's over the hill and back to Kirk Mill, where the tails on into blinds. Then snacks so the breeze can circle with ease, and it's well seasoned timber on chippings from spines.
The quantity chairs, I think there was a wood turning place called Wilkinson's at Fortin, and they used to buy in from those. They would turn them, ship them in. Eventually, he actually bought the firm.
Fortin wood turnings, where they turn most of our legs for our chairs and tables.
And then, late in 1968, they actually started buying automats. Well, one for a start, it was an automat, I think it was from Germany. And literally, it was, they get a piece of wood, which they were going to make into a chair leg. They would put them in at the one end. It would go through the whole process in one machine.
Yeah, well, things like the big, they called them automats, are made by Zuckerman's in Vienna. One man was doing what will be 8 jobs before.
The chair making is with all the mechanisation you can put in it, and we did put an awful lot of mechanisation. We had lots of CNC, computer controlled machines, robot spraying machines. We had all the best tech you could get for chair making.
Time moves on, doesn't it? Time moves on, you can't do anything about it. In regard to providing jobs, it's a bad thing. But in regard to providing goods for people at the right price, that's probably the positive side of it.
Jack Berry, he was the son of the former boss, John Berry, and he took over in 1966. A very well-respected man. He did a lot in the local community. He was very much involved in local affairs.
You knew the boss, and it was quite, to me, he was a good boss. You did your job, and it was, but if very few occasions where I needed to ask him something, maybe I need time off or something, he would go, and he was, and if he could do it, but he'd tell you there and then.
He got presented, didn't he, with the Queen. The reason being for what he had done for the village and for the area, both in providing all the jobs and looking after the area.
We used to have, obviously like anywhere, we used to have a good time, crack with the lads and sort of thing, and we used to play football at lunchtimes. That was in the yard. These are some of the chaps that I work with in the polish room. The upholsterers, that would be taken, 80s, late 70s, early 80s perhaps. Oh, that's in the, that'll be at Talbot, that'll be one lunchtime. We used to go down there and have a drink on a Friday or Christmas time even, so that must be that days. Meanwhile, back at the Talbot, I got taken on the ambulances I think I went for my interview on the 9th of October of 81, and they offered me the job, and they gave me a starting date of the 30th of November, and so I knew we were finishing. And I thought, well, I'm going to ask. I said, Ken, we've sprayed these tabletops. How many? I don't know, hundreds upon hundreds of them. I said, but we've never had a photograph yet. So I took my camera. I said, right, you take one of me and I'll take one of you. And this is the only ones I have. I'll be working.
Maybe in the 70s, one or two of the people we supplied started disappearing from the scene. Sometimes owing quite a lot of money to the firm, as foreign competition started to come in.
Globalisation was encouraged, and we were always on a hiding to nothing eventually, really, with that. Any country that has a lower paid workforce has got a chance to be more competitive with us. What happened with China was that obviously their workforce was at the time was the lowest paid in the world, so you could you had a very, very low labour cost, relatively to here.
They can do it even cheaper with less labour rates, and that's where it leads to. But time moves on and they can't stop it.
They haven't got the same ethics that we have. They've got no human rights as compared to us. There's no health and safety, there's no environmental laws. All these things that we had to comply with, and which were costs to us, and rightly so, they didn't have to comply with.
And that's another thing, in my opinion, that led to the demise of the firm. The costs involved in some of these things, which to me cost Berries a lot of thousands and thousands of pounds, proving they were okay.
Well, it was 2010 and it was January, and we knew things hadn't been good for years, really, and the workforce was reduced. But what a shock it was when it suddenly shut, just like that, one afternoon.
I mean, it's part of our heritage, isn't it? Like I say, it was the centre of Chipping, it was the lifeblood of Chipping and the whole area, really. And you never really have envisaged it was gone.
Our rights move on, the cornmill has gone. There's a rumbling down Monkhill Brown. There's things to be heard, and the rats to be heard. HJ knows he's to make it somehow. It's apples and pears, old berry chairs, pheasants, damsons and blowns. The water wheel turns, the farmer's wife turns, and young H.J. Merry, he's doing his soul.